Cool. So I think we'll just get started, even though we've still got people that are going to be trickling in anyway. So welcome, everyone, today. Thanks so much that you could join us. We really appreciate it. And we'll try to give you some really good content and discussions that you can take away with you today. So obviously the title of today's webinar is From Web Traffic to Foot Traffic, How to Increase Your Visibility by 200%. And then during this webinar, we will be talking about, give you some kind of tips, but we're going to also keep it relatively informal. We've got a couple of experts on here today, so we want to give them room to really share their points of view, but also to answer your questions as well. So at any point today during this webinar, if you have a question, just write it in the chat. We really want to get those questions in and also answer them as they're coming in, or try to at least. So yeah, just any stage, just put your question in the chat bar and we'll try and get that answered as quickly as possible. Cool. All right, so let's move on, and I'm going to go to the next slide. There we go. So just wanted to run through a couple of housekeeping tips. As I've said before, the questions can be popped into that GoToWebinar panel, but also we have a short survey at the end of this fireside chat. Does not take longer than 30 seconds to answer, so please don't jump off immediately after the webinar is completed. Please stay around and answer that. It really helps us to understand where we can improve for next time as well. So what we'll actually be talking about today, as you see here, is we'll start out, I'll actually start out by explaining sort of the current state of marketing at the moment, and also the value of location-based marketing within the current space. And then we're going to get Stephen up here talking about local ranking factors in 2021, and then finish it off by some tips on how to succeed at local SEO. And during this, we've got a couple of couple of questions that we want to ask the audience, and then obviously we're going to be stopping regularly to have discussions too. Great. So first, let's meet both of these extraordinary men. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself, and then Stephen just jump in right after?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Good to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul O'Donoghue. I'm Global Vice President of Solution Engineering at Uberall, and I've been in the search and local space for probably 25 years, working with clients, all over the world, having to solve their problems and increase visibility and connect with their customers through the local customer journey. And really great to have Stephen with us today, who I've known for a few years. And it's a pleasure to have you with us today, Stephen. Do you want to introduce yourself, mate?
Yeah, sure. Cheers, Paul. I am about 10 years into the industry now, and I spent the first more than half of that agency side. I took a brief detour in-house when I worked for Pendragon PLC, so the largest automotive retailer in Europe. And I've got a bit of a case study to talk around Pendragon later in this deck as well. And then for the last 2 years and 2 months, I've owned a creative search agency called Rise at 7. So we started in June 2019, me and my co-founder, Carrie Rose. We're now 100 people in 2 countries, 4 offices. We're working across Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, as well as North America and the UK. So one of the fastest growing SEO agencies around, I think.
That's really cool. I've got a quick question. Creative search agency, just give us a little bit more on that, because it's quite unique, really, isn't it?
What we really do, and I think the kind of proposition that we've tried to build at Rise, is what's happened over the last 10 years in search is it's got more and more creative, but it's got more and more creative up to the point where it's still recognizable as SEO stuff for the most part. And we're competing with advertising agencies, we're competing with the biggest creative agencies in the world. And the way that we approach that is, what if our stuff was as good as their stuff, but the reason that we did it was for SEO? So we do everything from out-of-home advertising through to lots of PR and broader PR stuff like press office and reactive, as well as product PR, as well as kind of digital PR stuff as well. So it's really creative work, but the purpose of that creative work is to drive a search result.
Fantastic. That's so great. Thanks.
It makes a lot of sense as well. I mean, obviously doing a lot of creative stuff for myself, you always kind of want that extra bit of, I guess, the promotion alongside of it in terms of the SEO optimization there as well. So it's really cool to hear. Cool. So let's just jump into getting started. Let's just talk a bit about search before I'm going to sort of start out by setting a foundation for this conversation that we're going to have. And I just wanted to start with this kind of idea of like search volumes and then the growth of local search. So local search has grown in the last decade to really be a large portion of online search out of around 2 trillion annual search queries, approximately 700 billion carried local intent. And it's a conservative estimate. I mean, Google doesn't regularly publish a lot of this type of information, but from what we understand, local has grown to really be a big part of, the search landscape. And, obviously we can't forget Corona and the impact it's had on the way that consumers search, the way that they find, the way that they engage on both online and offline. And so, we've seen a rapid acceleration of, e-commerce purchases in the UK over this kind of 2020 to 2021 period, to make up roughly 30% of total UK retail sales. And this is it's a pretty big deal because, we're talking about the fact that, consumers are creatures of habit. And so unless it's really a necessity for them to change their habits, they won't actually do it. And so obviously the forced sort of digitalization of a lot of companies, because of Corona, because of this, the fact that consumers weren't going out into their local stores to actually make purchases, has meant that there's been a development of this kind of hybrid journey, or where consumers are potentially buying online and then going to the store to pick up offline, these type of things. And so it's created unique opportunities within the search landscape, but it's also changed the relationship between online and offline as well. But in terms of local, like how important is local still? And what we found through a lot of, over 2020, 2021, a lot of both of our own internal statistics and external stuff we've actually seen from Google is that local's still holding in there really strong. Obviously, when people are searching, they might do a lot of searches online. Maybe they can't pick it up directly from the store, so they're doing e-commerce purchases, but they're also traveling a lot more than their direct communities. And so you see a lot of growth in queries like available near me or curbside pickup, which has grown exponentially over the last year. Yeah, and so this is the place that we've come to our first poll. So we're going to launch this, and just as an FYI, if you see this like big screen and it feels like you've been kicked out, that's not the case. So just bear with us. This poll is going to pop up and it might dominate your screen, but once you answer, it'll drop back down again. So the poll is, what has been your main focus during the pandemic? So it may not be any of these, but if you have one that's more than the rest, just pick one. The choices are obviously analytics, e-commerce, customer experience, paid advertising, or SEO. And please just answer one of those, and then we'll take a look. And then Paul and Stephen, feel free to jump in once these answers have come in, and then let's maybe discuss potentially why this is. Cool. So we have a lot for SEO there. Probably no surprise considering the audience. Stephen, what have you seen around the climate in terms of what marketers are doing or what they're trying to achieve within this kind of local landscape?
I think just looking at the poll results, the first thing that's not really a surprise is the analytics not being a core focus, because at this point there is much less complexity, or certainly during lockdown, it's been much more measurable what's driving what, because there isn't that kind of offline purchasing behavior that muddies the waters when it comes to digital analytics. So definitely makes sense that that's lower. I think very early on in lockdown, so the first time around in sort of March last year, the knee-jerk reaction from most, but not all of our clients was pause paid advertising and refocus on SEO. And one of our kind of biggest sectors, or if not our biggest sector, is retail. We have a lot of e-commerce only brands, but we also have a lot of brands who historically their website might have been 10 or 20% of their overall revenue that suddenly became 100% of their overall revenue overnight. And it wasn't necessarily that the kind of e-commerce infrastructure needed an overhaul. They were really well-run businesses. It was more a case of they're used to the footfall, they're used to people knowing where the store is, and when it comes to search, not knowing where the store is. So SEO became a massive focus for a lot of the brands that we were already working with, and I think we've really benefited as a pure play SEO focused agency. We've had a massive benefit net from COVID, because so many brands have kind of decided that SEO is the crucial thing that they need to get right over the course of the next year or two while this thing's still around.
And do you think,
Stephen,
just on that, yeah, sorry, go Paul.
Yeah, sorry, Brad. Stephen, on that's really interesting, and equally, I'm not surprised to see analytics as quite low, but customer experience is interesting because that ties quite nicely into SEO from during that pandemic where consumer behaviors and business behaviors were changing. Did you have to do anything to refocus to connect customers locally through that near me journey? Were there any SEO tactics or any SEO changes you had to sort of do there for customers that really weren't, in the local conversation?
There weren't that many changes from our perspective, and the reason is because most of our clients are very national. So you're talking about 50, 60, 100 locations, and I think that the kind of, if you're dividing businesses up into broad categories based on number of locations, it's those businesses who have got a very strong local presence, and their store or their physical location is a really big significant part of their community that makes a huge difference. So when I'm thinking about clients like Matalan, for example, they're on the outskirts. They are not necessarily, the hub of the community when it comes to the stores. So we didn't have that same level of opportunity on a lot of our retail clients. Where it was quite different is in travel. So our kind of probably our biggest sectors, retail first, financial services second, travel third. Travel obviously has had a huge overhaul over the last 18 months, and the emphasis on local, whether that's kind of just hygiene stuff of making sure that the listings are correct and reflect whether a place is open, how do you book, what kind of cleaning measures are in place, etc., all the way through to is this going to be the right kind of destination for me because I am vulnerable or because I have these particular needs because I've got a family, etc. That's where there's been a huge shift, where travel brands are probably putting a lot more focus on an individual location rather than that aggregated all of our parks, all of our hotels, all of our places that you can book with us.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thanks for that.
No problem.
Great. Okay. Let's move on to the next section here. So this is the part about increasing visibility by 200%, specifically looking at the value of location-based marketing. And so from recent studies, so the name of the game here today is obviously this 200% metric. And so from our a couple of recent studies, one we launched this year, what is the value of listings? Obviously, we've looked at citations, and we've seen going around the web this question of, do local citations matter anymore? And this has been kind of a growing, I guess there's been a growing chorus of voices online talking about that, if either that it's not so important anymore, or that it's just diminishing, right? And so what we wanted to do is, because we have a lot of locations that we manage, and we wanted to see what the actual data was telling us, or this in-house data that we have, and then just to run that ourselves. And so from our local listings or local citations study, we looked at 80,000 locations from France, Germany, and the UK. And we found that when we looked at the buckets of those locations, that we're on, say, for instance, under 10 directories versus the ones that are at the more extreme end to 30 or 39 directories, we found that there was a total increase of almost 200% visibility. And so this kind of speaks to the fact that, I guess, managing your information across the web is really important, keeping it consistent and accurate, really important still for locations that are looking to increase visibility online. We also had a big round table with this data and got a bunch of SEOs involved. And one of their pushbacks was that, it's basically the whole ball game in terms of local. If you're a business that prioritizes your local management, local data management, local listings, your review management, local pages on your website, doing all of this kind of work, putting all the work in terms of prioritizing your local SEO, then you're actually going to probably be one of these businesses that actually increases your visibility in search by quite a bit. And so what they were saying was that, yeah, these are probably the more mature businesses that are in this kind of 30 to 39 category, that they manage their data like this, right? And so we also had another study last year, which was about branded versus unbranded search. And I think it kind of leads nicely into this conversation about increasing unbranded search. And so just in terms of, again, we looked at the pre-state of a bunch of locations, and I think it was about 40,000. We looked at their pre-state and their increase over a 6-month period, which is about 25% visibility on Google versus their post-state, say, for instance, with Uberall, and managed data, right? And we found that there was a 140% increase over that period in visibility. And so when we looked at also branded search, what came out of that, we found in terms of the retail space that there was actually a 200% increase in their local branded searches. So there's this kind of equilibrium, I guess, where you get your unbranded searches feeding back into your branded searches later on, which is why things like review management is so important, and then kind of ticking all the boxes, the most important things in local becomes very important, because they're going to search first of all for product services, and they're going to come back and search for your local stores or points of sale. Yeah, and that's kind of something that our data found, which was really interesting, I think, over this time. And this is just an example of that. I like to use this example quite a bit, actually, because petrol stations are, in essence, they do both products and they do services, right? So they have car washes and they have petrol, but they also have groceries and they have coffee. And there's all these different types of, products and services that they do, but also there's these categories that they now are available to be searched by. So when someone's on the road, they're not always going to be searching for a petrol station. Sometimes they're going to be searching for coffee. Sometimes they're going to be searching for, I don't know, snack near me, these different search terms. So if you're able to manage that data in a way that actually brings all of your locations to life, or to the 3-pack, up into the ranking in the local 3-pack for some of these search queries, you're going to be found for more searches, found for more unbranded searches, and then this is going to lead to obviously more visibility in search. It's kind of a no-brainer, and this is one of the reasons that one of our customers, Total, got 120% increase in their max views. Great, and so this is kind of where we want to stop and have our second quick question here. And obviously,
Brad,
oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, off you go, Paul.
Sorry, just before we do that, sorry, mate. I just wanted to spend some time on those last couple of slides, if possible, because it's really important information and some great data there. And I think, during the conversations, we've had sort of getting ready for this. I think one of the comments from Stephen recently was like, there's no silver bullet. And, firstly, on citations, citations, like, they're not sexy. They're things that, people sometimes, forget about, or just assume is going to be taken care of somewhere down the line. But you look at the way that, how the Google algorithm, how it looks at information and how it looks at relevancy and how it looks at trust to be able to make that final judgment on what result it's going to show. The citations play a really important part there. It might not be as broad as it was, say, 10 years ago when there was a massive, big sort of ecosystem, but there are 7 or 8 key players in that citation world that Google still refers to from a trust perspective. And I think, when we look at some of the changes that's happened over the last sort of 18 to 24 months within the search, you're now seeing other references of directories in the just above the SERPs. I know there's some sort of some EU regulations that's kind of for anti-competitionists that's enforce some of these changes, but it's great because there's still validation points. So it's really important that citations are taken up as part of the mix, because it is still a key factor in sort of that Google algorithm of how it looks at a business and how it looks at data. And then coming through into sort of just increasing the visibility and the sort of branded versus unbranded. Indirect searches were one of the big winners over the last 2 years, where we saw that change in consumer behavior. Searches became again more broad, sort of long tail. We went from this period of 5 to 6 years ago being sort of long tail to exact, and people getting smarter. And then it opened back up again because we were having to search for things that weren't familiar to us. So we were asking questions, and that's when structured data, and that's when all of these sort of key attributes that you have from technical SEO to off-page SEO and the foundational factors came to play. And the companies that won were the ones that really addressed this quickly across the board. And I know that Total was one of those, and others, Matalan as well as a co-customer that we have, Stephen, worked really hard to make sure that the presence and the automation of data being effectively changed, opening hours, closing times, curbside pickups, these various different rules around sort of various lockdowns, all came to solidify and strengthen a company's visibility in the eyes of Google when customers are making searches. So really, really important. And these behaviors and these patterns will now continue. They will become the new norm, and that's sort of that new hybrid, in terms of that customer journey. So the positives of what we've learned from an SEO perspective, are really good. So I just wanted to just to highlight those facts.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point as well. Is that in this thought of giving consumers more choice online, but also accounting for the I guess increasing differences in search queries, right? And there's this thing where obviously you get your near me search is accounted for by your, say for instance, your local listings. But if you're getting something like a branded search where, I don't know, we have a bio company in Berlin, which is a big one, and for their local pages, they're not going to search, a lot of the time they'll search bio company Berlin, right? And then that's when they're going to be wanting to integrate or interact with their local pages, and that's when they want to go and search and sit there and say, I want to look at all of the locations that they have in Berlin. So they want to go to the website and they want to go on their store locator, versus the kind of queries which is like they're out walking on their phone, they just want to find the nearest one near them, which will bring up the knowledge graph on the side. So it's kind of like that idea of making sure that you're completely optimized for that local search journey. And that obviously also that, for instance, within reviews, those indicators come up as well, that within reviews, if someone says great service and they're looking for, say, a petrol station with great service, within the reviews, that'll jump up as well in terms of the relevancy of those searches. So, I mean, you got to have all your bases covered there in local. And if you do, that's when you can start seeing these really big gains.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that the consumers have much more choice, and that's one of the great things that's come out of this. And a local online presence, it is still an essential part of that, that customer journey. So companies have to make sure they are covering all areas and all facets of the customer journey and all those different touch points.
Absolutely. So now, before I hand over to Stephen to take the next part, I just again like to deliver a poll here for all of you to answer. The ROI winners for 2021. So what are the things that kind of that you believe have delivered the biggest return on investment this year? The answers are pretty much, the questions are pretty much the same in terms of the categories. But I think, understanding what is most valuable to you, probably since you've put your efforts into SEO, that might be the answer. Cool. But let's see what they are. So please answer those, and let's please answer what you feel has brought you the most value, both this year and I guess last year. So during that pandemic period.
I think analytics is going to be the winner here. Maybe not. But it's interesting though, I wonder where analytics then is going to come back in, in the next 12 months. We're seeing some wonderful, results, from our advanced analytics tools, where customers are looking and comparing the success of locations, and making sure they carry that success over into sort of poorer performing environments. So analytics, as Stephen quite rightly said, was not much of a focus because it was like, what do we need to do? But then going forward now with all of these changes we talked about, analytics is going to play a big part going forward, I think.
Yeah, and I think also a lot. Yeah, sorry, Stephen, go.
One of the interesting things about analytics generally, and especially kind of during this COVID period, is we go into COVID and things have changed, as well as the kind of customer behavior and just the world in general, where things like Google and deprecating third-party cookies and all of the action ICO's taking and all of the kind of advancements on GDPR we're talking about now with cookie laws, etc., etc. What ultimately is going to happen is when customer behavior settles back down to something kind of approaching what it was, analytics will not be anything like it was when we went into this either. So fundamentally, that's a discipline that's going to be enormously different from now on. There's never going to be analytics, never be the same again.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You're absolutely right, and everything has shifted, and it just interesting in terms of not what you're analyzing, but how you're analyzing it. And what are those key triggers that come out of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, how are we doing on the poll?
Oh, yeah. Do we have results there, Kat? Oh, nice. Yeah, so SEO and ads.
Yeah.
Those are the two big winners, but analytics does have some votes there now, where it was 0 before. So, but yeah, I mean, any insights there from these guys? I noticed that customer experience is also jumping up there a little bit too. So,
I think with ads particularly, obviously, I said earlier on that a lot of our clients paused their ad spend at the early days of lockdown, and certainly the market has been, I wouldn't say less competitive, but some of the big spenders are spending a lot less than they were. So we do have quite a few clients who again, because we don't really do the paid advertising side of things, we do see them they're basically committing twice as much as they previously would have done, because the inventory's there. They can, grow significantly in the ad space that they wouldn't have been able to do previously, because it was just such a competitive auction previously. So I think what's been really interesting from an ads point of view is how much growth people have been able to deliver during lockdown because of the lessened competition from that point of view.
Definitely, it's interesting to see digital PR so high as well. That's really refreshing. That's it's one of your areas of focus, right, Stephen?
Yeah, definitely. And it's that combination of digital PR and SEO. And I'll talk about this quite a bit in a mo when we're looking at local ranking factors generally. But I think it's a two-part strategy. And I think that digital PR as a discipline has very much broken out of SEO, and it's not just part of the things that you do for SEO, but something much broader and much more capable delivering ROI outside of just search rankings now. And I think that's what's really changed over the last few years.
Definitely. And just come back onto the ads topic as well. I mean, we've seen some great success at Uberall with our Near Me Ads products. In terms of new customers coming into sort of local ads and local performance ads, where they can tie ads in more sort of targeted to sort of the customer needs and the changing behaviors of customers, both during lockdowns and now sort of seeing it outside of lockdown as well, where Google has changed the way that companies can interact and connect with their customers. And local ads has been a real sort of eye-opener for us in terms of not just the local extension ads, but tying it into GMB, and making it sort of really relevant to that local area. And we're seeing good consistent growth, 20% month on month, of ads usage. So that is interesting. Again, similar to analytics, a traditional digital practice being used in a different way that was developed, from a needs-based scenario around sort of lockdowns and COVID, that is going to become the new norm in this sort of this new hybrid journey going forward.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it ties back to what Stephen said about ads being something that is potentially the spend went other places for other companies, so you're potentially seeing better ROI if you're doing something like local ads, which is not potentially prioritized by a lot of other companies out there or competitors in that space.
Definitely.
Right.
I'm looking forward to hearing what Stephen has to say on the digital PR side, because it is that wonderful sort of hybrid of definitely tapping into the world that we're in now of social content and how that content is being used and how it's been used to disrupt the environment. And I love the fact that structured data, AI, looking at the way that content is used, it's something I think is going to get more and more influential in the SEO landscape. So I'm really excited about sort of hearing what Stephen has to say about that in a minute. Kind of just set you up really well there, haven't I?
Yeah.
So Stephen, just let me know when you want me to the slides for you, and then I'll do that.
Yeah, cool. Let's go for the next one, please, Brad. So I think that hybrid is a word that we keep using, and I think that's a very good way of talking about search generally, right? So search exists in dichotomies, and it always has, and that's at the very top level. We're talking about paid versus organic, two different approaches to getting in search results, and you could broadly categorize all of search into one of those two things. But when you go into SEO, again, you've got on-site SEO and you've got off-site SEO, which are the two ways of getting into search results from that point of view. And I think that when we're questioning the value of citations, what we fundamentally got wrong there is what citations do. So because they're in that off-site SEO category, we believe that they should do something similar to what links do for our brands. And again, coming back into those dichotomies, what Google ranks, what Google wants to see from a company and a website is a website that is both healthy and popular. So healthy in the sense that it's easy to crawl, it's easy to access. When we're talking about core web vitals and layout shift and all of the kind of user experience benefits that Google's trying to enforce with its algorithm updates more recently, we're talking about a site that's healthy. We're talking about a site that's a good experience for people to use. It's not a negative experience in any way. And that's a big part of technical SEO, and that's a big part of on-site SEO. And then we're talking about popular. Well, Google has for a very long time preferred brands. And there are a lot of factors that go into making a brand, and one of those things certainly is links. And when we talk about digital PR as being, a kind of breakout from SEO, it's because it drives popularity outside of just links. It's not just links as one vote, one signal to show that a website's popular. It's also driving brand search. It's also driving mentions, and in its own way, citations across the internet. And what people in the SEO space mostly get wrong about citations is that because it's offsite, they believe it's about making you popular. So they think that more citations is the strategy. And you go and look for as many possible citations as you can find and build them because that makes my website popular. And that's not true. Citations make your website healthy. Citations are telling Google that you look after your customers, your opening hours are correct, the kind of information that you give to people is accurate. And that's a huge part of search ranking now. And when you think about local SEO generally, it's almost like the concept that Google's had for a little while has been your money or your life. We're talking about healthcare, we're talking about financial services when you've got credit cards involved and that kind of thing. Well, local SEO now, you're going to go to a physical location in a global pandemic. It's your money or your life here now. You're going to go into a store and you need to know, well, in a very basic sense, you're going to get really pissed off if it's not open and it says that it was. But from a much broader sense than that, what kind of social distancing measures do they have? If I'm a vulnerable person, I don't want to be going out to a store that's not going to take that seriously. So it becomes a much, much broader conversation around local SEO than just hygiene from a technical Google point of view, but that is the thing. So regardless of, the core citations, and there are, like Paul says, some really key players that we absolutely need to get right and pass the right information there, because Google uses that. Google uses information from wherever it can get information, so we have to take it seriously. Inaccurate information is fed into the algorithm from all over the internet, and if we have the opportunity as SEOs to make sure that the overwhelming majority of that information is accurate, generally speaking, it's true that we rank better. The more accurate we are, the less processing power we require from Google, the more we're rewarded. That's from a crawl budget point of view, where we're not giving it junk URLs. That's also from a citation point of view, where we're not giving it junk information across the internet. So citation, regardless of the kind of split here, whether citations are 7% of the importance, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's more a case of that's a box you have to tick. That's the price of entry. That's pay to play. You've got to get your citations in order, and then you can think about growing your local presence over and above that. So on the next slide, I'm going to start talking about a case study where we got that right first. And this is a client that we share with Uberall, you know, as a impartial third party. I should mention BBC Styler, that other location management platforms are available. However, this is an Uberall shared client with us as well. We got the data in order first. Everything is accurate, everything is correct, the on-site content is good, and the overall threshold of quality is high, and the information on site is accurate and includes reviews. All of those kind of hygiene factors, for want of a better term, they're in place. So I think about that as almost a tick or a cross. You're either on or you're not when it comes to a lot of those factors. And we started by getting that stuff right. But then to grow our local presence, we're talking about popularity. So here is a graph that shows the growth of referring domains, specifically pointing to these location pages over the course of the time that we worked with this client, and broken down especially between referring domains that are just generally referring domains, because that happens, whether it's scraped, whether that's, you know, local focused newspapers, for example, tend to have a lower domain authority than the likes of the Express, CNN, Forbes, and the Daily Mail. But we've broken that out into really high authority links, mentions, etc., that are pointing to those location pages as well. And we find this, you know, Google Analytics acquisition using the regex formula in the bottom right hand corner. You can go to the next one, please, Brad. You can see that an increase in growth of referring domains correlates very strongly with an increase in growth of traffic as well. So that 2017, 2018, 2019, that initial uptick, that's getting things in order. That's Uberall being in place, getting citation data owned and accurate and uniform and correct. That's improving the overall quality and experience of those pages. And then you can see where we get very involved looking at link building specifically, and that generates the next level of growth. Once we've got a website and a local ecosystem that's healthy, we're now getting a website and a local ecosystem that's popular. And the next one, please, Brad. That's not just in terms of traffic coming via Google Maps or coming via the pack itself, but this is also just generic search and the difference that that can make when we're talking about links and popularity. Often pointing to the location pages themselves, sometimes pointing to just the location section of the website, sometimes just referencing locations, pointing to wherever it points to on the website. One of the things that's particularly different in the digital PR space versus the older school link building space is that we don't necessarily get a lot of control over how a journalist refers to us. They have to have editorial discretion. So for us, we can strongly hint that yes, we would love a link, please, and it'd be really nice if it was followed. We can create campaigns on the right sort of areas of the website that encourage journalists to link through to the areas that we want them to link through to, but the chances are very high if you reach out to a journalist and say, can you link to my location page, please? You won't get a link, and you probably won't even get covered. So you can only give these very strong hints in that sense. But through doing that, through building a couple of hundred links into location pages, and a couple of thousand links into the website itself, we see a very significant increase in the average rank according to Google Search Console across all of these key locations. And even where there is a negative change, it's very minimal. It's just not been one of the focus locations. We've not focused our campaigns over those particular pages. And then next one, please, Brad. That's all very well and good, but what it has to correlate with is revenue. And again, you can see the difference between 2017-18 and 2018-19, where we get our house in order, we've got our pages correct, we've got the content on the pages, and content is a really long game as well. Like, you create a content hub around a location now, you can look at what the ROI is over a month, but you're probably a lot better looking over the ROI over a lifetime of it, because it ranks better and better, drives more and more traffic, sometimes picks up links naturally, and even if it doesn't, you can get links to that content over a period of time. It's not a campaign that's done and that's finished. So getting that content right in the first place is almost a hygiene thing, but it's really building the foundations for making a site popular. And then that link building side of things on the other end of it, you can see a lot of increased transactions coming via those location pages that corresponds with basically a doubling of revenue in the millions, because people are going to location pages and they are booking, they are getting a product basically via this. And you can see that the overall number of users and sessions, and this is what's particularly interesting, the overall number of users and sessions is increasing, definitely, but not at the same pace that transactions and revenue are increasing, because again, it comes down not only to, yes, we're ticking the box from Google's point of view, but also we are giving crucial information that is life or death. It's whether people are going to book with you or not, whether they're going to buy from you or not. And that local ecosystem is a core part in people deciding whether they want to become a customer of yours, regardless of just whether their awareness is there, whether they've seen you in Google and clicked on the website. It's a trust signal, if nothing else.
That's really interesting. Sorry, Brad. I keep doing this to you because I just want, there's so many questions I want to ask. So I'm conscious of time as well. And that's incredibly interesting, Stephen. It's so good to see that data. You know, case studies are always, you know, they're always going to be, you know, positive. But it's so great the way you built that story of where you started from. You know, the health aspect, and then looking at sort of, you know, using that to then move forward. So when you talk about sort of link building, and it is wonderful because link building does have this horrible sort of, you know, old school tarnish of, you know, of what it used to be, rather than sort of content-based, targeted content-based link building. And you're right, you've got to build that relationship with the journalist or, you know, the media outlet, you know, and hope that content is compelling enough to spark interest and for them to use it. When you look at your digital PR strategies, do you consciously look at how we can affect local, or because I know sort of most sort of digital sort of PR content is sort of national based, but do you look at sort of breaking it down and going hyper local on this?
Even when we have clients that don't have physical locations, local will often be an angle for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because when we're investing in a digital PR campaign, there's probably research involved, there's potentially an asset to be created. Even if that's a blog post, you know, it takes some time, but it could be something quite expansive and extravagant in some cases, depending on what a client wants to do or is willing to let do a lot of the time. And if we are going with a local angle as well as a national angle, that extends the life of that campaign, that sweats the asset for more links, for more longevity, and you know, a much wider audience. And what's really interesting is, particularly with our travel brands too, local publications drive more traffic and more revenue than national ones, because if you're on the Daily Mail, you are one of 100 stories on the Daily Mail that day, and you probably get a lot of traffic. Actually, it does drive a bunch of traffic through, but you are just one of the stories that's going on in that particular location. Whereas when you've got a local focused angle on a local publication that maybe publishes 5 or 6 stories a day, maybe 10, we've got a travel brand who gets a lot more revenue from the whole Daily Mail than the Daily Mail. And that's because they've got
Mm.
a location near Hull where we talk about that particular location on that publication, and people go, yeah, I wouldn't mind going there. They click through and they buy things. So even national clients or e-commerce clients have a local angle to them, but it's really useful for us to be thinking about local as an angle generally, just from a journalist point of view, because they like that interest. And we do a lot of global work as well, and that extends much broader than that. So if you're working in Ireland is a perfect example of this, to be honest. For the French are the same. If you've got some sort of study that compares the French with the English and says the French are better in some way, you get a lot of coverage for that. Irish definitely feel the same sort of way. You can get broad national coverage in different countries. It's the same with cities. If you can compare Lancashire and Yorkshire, if you can compare the north and the south, you get a very broad range of interest from those particular locations. Now, if you have a local angle to your marketing, if you have a local strategy because you have locations, then you can tie that together. It's not just about getting links because the brand said something. It now becomes something around those particular locations. So one example, we have a bunch of finance clients, one of them with national branches. So we ran a report talking about the high street in different locations. So what high streets in what cities are, doing well, and which high streets in which cities are not doing well. And that is data around ATM closures, number of bank branches closing, all the way through to number of shops that are vacant, etc. So we're talking about the financial health of a particular city and the customer spending patterns there, where we have branches in those cities where we can reference that. And we get more local pickup because that particular publication knows that we are a part of that local community, and we are driving traffic to those local pages and links to those local pages as well. So local publications are a bit of a mixed bag in SEO terms, because a lot of people believe that when you get syndicated across the entire Johnson Press or Reach network or whatever, well, that's 55, 60 links, but it only counts as one on your targets, and that's a problem. If you stop thinking in terms of link targets and start thinking in terms of marketing, making money for clients, doing good things, helping the local community, and generally actually being a brand rather than being an SEO with a link target, it's net good. It's always good to do that.
Absolutely. That's phenomenal insight. Yeah, and really refreshing to hear as well. And it does tie back into everything that we've talked about above, which is fantastic. Thanks, Stephen.
No problem.
It's really interesting. Let's move on to some tips of how to succeed at local SEO as well. I mean, we've already you've just been kind of alluding to some really interesting insights there, but take us away again, Stephen. Let us hear more.
So this is the business case that I presented to my previous employer when I was in-house, where we were talking about bringing on a location management platform to help us deal with our local listings. And I think the reason I wanted to show this is, firstly, this is an opportunity. If you're an SEO, local SEO now is one of your routes to the big boy table, because it's much broader than you now. It's not just traffic and visibility. It's an enormously important part of marketing generally that's separate somewhat to your traditional SEO approach to things. So this is kind of prioritized in things that are absolutely crucial to us and things that are important enough to mention, and reasons for getting the location management platform in place. So the first one is analytics, and I've said analytics is a bit of a mixed bag at the moment. One thing that was certainly true at Stratstone and Evans Halshaw, so we had 270 dealerships altogether, including all of the different Stratstone brands and all of the Evans Halshaw dealerships and the Car Store dealerships, which is our third brand. And we had very little visibility internally about how does digital, how does the website, and how does our online presence influence people taking a step into a dealership, because that company has been around for 4 decades. It believes that people walk past the dealership, see a fancy car, and think, I'll go and have a look in there. And that's not necessarily true. A lot of people are looking for the information, they're looking for the directions, they're looking for where the nearest Ford dealership is, whether or not it's an Evans Halshaw. They're wanting to find a Ford car maybe at that point, and they might be going to Arnold Clark. So it's really important that we get into the journey at that particular stage. So the first thing for us was get a view of how much of that traffic that the business believes it's going to get anyway is actually down to our local presence online, and how much of the pie has digital got in that sense. Then there's the increase in search visibility, which is often what we talk about as the be all and end all of local SEO. But it's one part. It's significant for sure, and it's a really positive benefit. And in a lot of cases, and in this case particularly, it was the way that we could forecast an ROI in a very monetary sense. Now, that's one way of doing it. We're talking about much broader things here as well. So we're looking to claim brand pages across all of these kind of influential directories, all of these important citations that we didn't have the resource to just go and do, where people can go and click and yes, I'll register that page. And, you know, some of these pages are particularly problematic for actually getting that listing verified, etc., which didn't have the people and the staffing to be able to do that at scale for 270 dealerships, plus 8 in California, to be fair. Review management was the third thing. We had a review platform, and we know that people do leave us reviews on that platform, and we knew that people left us reviews on Google, but we didn't know to the extent that people reviewed us on 118.com or whatever other citation directory, whatever people are actually leaving us feedback on, that we just are completely ignoring because we don't have a view of where those reviews are happening. We've got our own strategy. We want to push Trustpilot and we want to push Google reviews, but people are going to talk to us wherever they want to talk to us, and we need to be conscious of that. And a location management platform allows us to get a broader view of that in a lot of cases too. And it also helps us to really think about sentiment and how are people feeling about us when we've got this very small part of the puzzle, and we know how people feel about us on Google reviews because we're influencing that. We're sat with them in some cases saying, can you leave us a review, when we think that they've had a really great experience. That's not real feedback. That's window dressing. That's us showing the world that we think we're a good company through the benefit of customers giving us that. But when customers go and leave us a review on Facebook that we haven't seen, it's a very honest review, and we want to see that. The fourth big priority for us was to centralize a lot of that location data. We had spreadsheets everywhere. Dealer principals had their own information about customers, about the inventory, about the staff, in Microsoft Excel spreadsheets somewhere. And we wanted to be able to hold a lot more of that information, especially personally identifiable information, in a singular place, so that we can start to destroy those spreadsheets across the business. Clearly, that's not again, like Paul said earlier, not a silver bullet. There's a lot of stuff to do there, but it gives us that first step to being able to control our inventory centrally with our central marketing team, where we don't have a physical presence in each of those 270 dealerships. And then the kind of lower priorities in a lot of senses, listing management for one thing, you know, manually modifying Google My Business for that many different listings is time consuming, especially when we've got 25 brands across Ford, Vauxhall, etc., who are like, we've got an event that we want to run. You've got to do a sale on these 50 odd dealerships. That's only going to be for this weekend, and then we're going to turn it off again. There's an enormous amount of resource that goes into just changing the information that's happening on pages. Customer experience during the journey to store. We know of plenty of examples where the actual postcode isn't the postcode that will take you to that place, because these are dealerships that can, you know, hold thousands of cars. You could come into the wrong end and not actually be able to get in through the door. And if you get dropped off in an Uber, for example, you've got to walk before you get there. Maybe you'll change your mind and go to the Harvester next door. We don't know. So, you know, hygiene of it, for one thing, was significant. And then, you know, correct store opening hours too. We have all of these dealerships. A lot of them have the sales aspect, but some of them have the service aspect as well. And the hours for the service center are different to the hours for the sales guys who you could buy a car from. So if you're going to get your car serviced and you turn up when the store isn't open, you're going to be pretty pissed off about that too. Lots of other time saving measures as well. If we can control some of that content through Uberall or through a location management platform instead of manually logging into Google My Business or elsewhere. That's very important for us. And then also the other bit that I would say most people say is the second most important thing, which is the bottom of our list. We're talking about voice search and future proof and just getting the data accurate for citations so that Google reads out the right thing. If you say, I'm not going to say it because I've got one in the room, but ask it a question. That's incredibly important for lots of people. It was one consideration for us. So I think the reason I want to talk a little bit about this is, firstly, get a lot of people involved in the case for this kind of stuff. It's really a big win across more than just your own traffic goals and your own KPIs. So you can get buy-in for doing local SEO from people who traditionally would have absolutely no interest in SEO whatsoever. As soon as you can start talking about PII, suddenly the accountants and legal are very happy that you're talking about it, and they're the people that say no most of the time. So it's really important to be able to have this conversation with a very broad lens about how local SEO impacts the whole marketing and, in fact, the whole business.
Great. So we're running out of time a little bit, so I'm just going to try and fast forward here. It's great stuff. Sorry, Stephen, didn't mean to undercut what you just said. It was all excellent. But in terms of like giving you like something to take away, so you can actually analyze the current state of things for your locations, Uberall has a tool. You can check that out. We will give you a link to it later. But it basically checks your accuracy, your data accuracy, and obviously review benchmarks, like what you're doing in search, and seeing then in terms of like it gives you a score at the end out of 100, and it looks at all these different factors. So after this is done, Kath, the person behind the curtain here in this webinar, we'll send out an email with a link that you can actually run a report to look at your local presence and analyze some of the factors that Stephen's just talked to you about. Great. And so we actually have, this has kind of come to the last slide here, but we have some questions now that we would like to get to in the few minutes that we have left. There's one question here that Kat has put in the chat. If there was one area or action you could suggest as a focus for improving visibility for points of sale in search, what would that be? Stephen.
I would say there isn't one action, no silver bullet, but I would definitely think in terms of health and popularity and start talking about internally how healthy is our local ecosystem, and how healthy is that making our customers feel when they're coming to stores. This like I said, is life or death for some people who are in vulnerable situations. So we need to be considerate of that. And then thinking about popularity as something altogether different, right? This is the price of entry when we're talking about citation management, we're talking about listing management. You've got to do it. It's not a possibility if we would like to grow. Actually, it's absolutely crucial.
And this is a question from for either of you. Any tips on how to measure customer experience improvements? I mean, this has kind of always been traditionally kind of a hard one to actually measure success in. So it'd be interesting to hear your feedback on that.
Okay, yeah, I think it's you need to have a look at the actions that are taking place. All of the things that Stephen showed in his wonderful case study. When you're looking at the input of your work, really have a look at that output. And don't just worry about small increases. Because those small increases make big differences in other areas. And so you have to really look at when traffic is going to your site, when your rank is improving. What are the improvements that are taking place outside of those volumes? So what actions are taking place, and how is that impacting ROI? And also, store location visits as well.
And then a last one for Paul here as well. Do you see any big changes or prioritizations from Google coming down the pipeline that early adopters might be able to jump on and get online visibility or engagement gains from?
That's an interesting one, but I'll tell you what, I'll shift the focus onto Apple, because we've spent a ton of time talking about Google. One of the things that Apple have just started to do is customer reviews. So we're starting to see in North America the ability for customers to add a rating, a thumbs up, into experiences in different locations. So if you've been to a restaurant, you get the opportunity there to sort of give it a rating in a number of categories. So that's an interesting new step in Apple there. We know that Apple are making great strides in local data, things like app clips as well. So keep an eye on Apple. We spend a ton of time on Google, but also look at the other ones that are coming up on the rouse.
Perfect. Thanks, guys, so much for that. We're right on 1 o'clock here in Berlin time, 12 o'clock over there in the UK. But thanks. Amazing conversation, guys. Knocked it out of the park as far as I'm concerned. Thank you so much for that. Obviously, we've got like I said, a little couple of questions at the end of this just to help us do better. Let us know once this is closed. And then obviously also, as we said, we will send you an email with the link to NEMI 360 to help you guys. But thanks so much for today. Thanks so much for coming. Paul, Stephen, pleasure as always. And yeah, thanks for everyone for joining today.
Cheers. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Stephen. Great having you on board, mate. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.